Everyone thinks I ruined the family's reputation, but they never saw the bruises hidden under designer sleeves or the threats buried inside polite emails. I kept receipts. Now, they want me erased. At my father-in-law's birthday party, I made one wrong move. A glass of red wine slipped, spilled across his perfect white shirt, and in the next heartbeat, his fist connected with my face. I can still feel the shock before the pain. The warm sting, the rush of blood in my mouth, the copper taste spreading across my tongue. My knees buckled, and before I could even catch my breath, he thundered. Stupid maid. Clean my shirt. The room was silent. 50 people. 50 witnesses. Crystal glasses frozen midair, silver forks hovering above untouched food. Some guests looked away, pretending not to see. Others smirked, like this was entertainment. Not a single soul stepped forward. And then, my husband, looked me straight in the eye. Not with horror, not with concern. His face was stone. Apologize to my father, or get out. That moment cracked something inside me. It wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. The man I married, the man I thought would shield me from this family's cruelty, had chosen his father over me without even blinking. I could feel the blood sliding from my lip onto their pristine marble floor, staining it in slow droplets. But I refused to cry. I refused to give them that. I picked up a silk napkin, wiped my mouth carefully, straightened my back, and walked out. Each step echoed like a gavel strike, like a declaration, I'm done. The winter air outside slapped me harder than Dorian ever could. My car was at the edge of their long driveway, its windshield already coated in frost. I slid behind the wheel, hands shaking, breath shallow. For a few long seconds, I just sat there staring ahead, trying to breathe through the metallic taste, trying not to break. The drive back into Boston blurred into streaks of snowflakes and city lights. My head pounded, my cheek throbbed, but worse than the pain was the replaying of his voice, my husband's voice, telling me to bow my head or leave. When I reached my apartment, I barely kicked off my shoes before collapsing onto the couch. My phone buzzed so violently it slid across the table. I picked it up. 68 missed calls. Alaric. Dorian. Over and over, like they were tag teaming. I didn't answer. Not one. But when I finally opened one of the messages, my blood went cold. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the same edge I always tumble onto after a day that's too long to count. Tonight, though, felt different. It was heavier. My little two-bedroom that usually smelled faintly of coffee and lavender suddenly felt like a shoebox, the walls pressing in as if the house itself judged me. The Corwin mansion hadn't stopped trailing me, its bright chandeliers and polished smiles seemed to have followed me home and planted a little stone of cold right in my chest. I promised myself I wouldn't look. I promised I wouldn't feed into the panic that was trying to crawl up my throat. But of course I picked up my phone. 68 missed calls. 68 tiny explosions. Unread text stacked like accusations. Each notification was a pulse I hadn't asked for. I scrolled. The messages blurred, but the tone didn't. Pick up. We need to talk. Alaric. You embarrassed the family, Calliope. Dorian. Don't make this worse, Alaric again. Threats wrapped as concern, concern dressed up as orders. Which was it this time, concern or command? When do words stop being comfort and start being a leash? A voicemail blinked at the bottom, one I'd missed amid the frantic buzzing. My thumb hovered. Delete it. Pretend it never happened. Run. My thumb pressed play. Dorian's voice filled the room, calm, composed, the kind of voice that has been practiced to intimidate without raising an eyebrow. Calliope, he said, as if we were discussing landscaping, accidents happen. But if you try to blow this up, it will be very bad for you. I have the best lawyers in Boston. Think carefully. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers with a velvet glove and a steel bone beneath. That sentence, casual threat wrapped in civility, landed like a cold hand on my throat. He didn't bother to hide the warning. He didn't need to. He was sure I would shrink. For a long time I just sat there, the phone humming faintly in my palm. The version of me from the last 3 years, the woman who smiled through the jabs, who swallowed every cutting remark at those long mahogany dinners, that version would have curled into herself. She would have called Alaric, sobbed, begged for forgiveness, promised to make things right, to be smaller, quieter, easier to love. She would have tried to make the situation dissolve like sugar in tea. But she wasn't the only me anymore. I let my mind drift where grief lives, back to my mother. It's been years since she left, but her voice still shows up at night like a ghost with good advice. Never let them see you break, she used to say when I came home from school with mascara tracks and a practiced smile. People like that? They feed on it. She taught me how to contain myself, how to turn tears into a private thing. Funny, I had thought that was survival. Turns out it had been training for something darker, being invisible. I pushed myself up, moving without really deciding to. The small desk by the window was a mess, unpaid bills, an army of takeout menus, a half-burned candle exhaling its last faint smoke. Under a pile of receipts I found the notebook I hadn't touched in months. What began as a diary had become a ledger, a strange, stubborn record of slights. Page after page held the quiet cruelties, the throwaway comments that had been passed off as jokes, the jabs that landed like tiny, steady pebbles until they'd tunneled into my bones. I flipped through it slowly. Dates, places, words. Lucky to marry into the family, given where you came from. Dorian, at a dinner. You should sign a prenup, a joke he made in front of guests, after we were married. Each entry started with a breath and ended with a bruise. My handwriting wavered at first, then sharpened as if the pen itself had found a spine. This wasn't catharsis anymore. It was documentation. Evidence, in ink. My hand went to the napkin folded still on the kitchen counter, the silk one from the party, darker now where the wine had met skin. It seemed ridiculous to hold on to a scrap of party debris, but it felt like a relic, a small, stubborn proof that I hadn't imagined the stain, that I wasn't inventing the history of how they treated me. I smoothed it with 2 fingers the way you smooth a letter you've been meaning to reread. Something about the weight of that little square in my palm made my jaw set. I whispered into the quiet, "This has to end." It came out small, almost a breath, but the words felt true and they tightened my ribs like a promise. I turned the phone face down on the bed, no more buzzing, no more dangling threats, and for the first time in hours, the apartment was still. Not the restful kind of still, the kind that feels like the air right before a storm breaks. I started making a list in the notebook. Names. Dates. Who was at which table. Which guest pretended not to see. What Alaric said and didn't say. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the ink smudged where my palm rested. Each line was a small rebellion, a refusal to let memory be erased by the family's polished version of reality. Then my phone lit up again. A single new message, different tone, different sender. I froze, heart thudding, the pen still in my hand. For a moment I considered letting it sit, ignoring the world, pretending the silence would protect me. But some part of me had already shifted. The notebook, the napkin, my mother's voice, they had changed the rules. I tapped the screen. And what I read next made something inside me break in a way I couldn't put back together. The morning light slipped through the blinds, pale and hesitant, like it wasn't sure it wanted to disturb me. Not that I'd slept anyway. I'd spent the night wide awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the city outside carrying on as if nothing had changed. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Neighbors' voices floated up from the street. The world moved on, while I was still replaying the moment I bled on marble floors while 50 people watched like it was entertainment. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't need to check it. I already knew. Alaric's name. Sometimes Dorian's. Sometimes both, like a coordinated attack. Their words, their tone, I didn't even have to read them anymore. Instead, I forced myself out of bed. My body felt like it weighed twice as much, like gravity had gotten personal, but I moved anyway. In the kitchen, I reheated yesterday's stale coffee in the microwave, holding the chipped mug between both hands just to stop them from shaking. The silence of my apartment was better than their voices, but it wasn't real safety. It was only skin deep. Then I opened my laptop. I told myself it was to work, to distract myself, to bury myself in something normal. But the first thing I saw wasn't my inbox. It was an email, from the Corwins. Not even from Dorian himself, but his assistant. Your silence is expected. Any attempt to escalate this incident will result in consequences for you, and your marriage. Just words on a screen, yet they hit me harder than Dorian's fist. Because that was the game. It was never just about the wine, or my cheek, or the insult. It was about control. Making sure I knew my place. Making sure I stayed quiet, obedient, invisible. And Alaric knew. Of course he knew. He stood there while his father called me a maid like I wasn't even human. He told me to apologize. Apologize, as if my blood staining their marble was somehow my fault. My hands trembled on the keyboard, not from fear. At least not entirely. This was something else. Something that had been simmering inside me for years, waiting for a match. That match came in the form of memory. A dinner months back, one of Dorian's favorite upscale restaurants. The kind where the wine list alone cost more than my monthly rent. Alaric had slid a folded document across the table, candlelight glinting off his father's cufflinks as Dorian watched silently, his smirk curling like smoke. Just legal housekeeping, Alaric said, voice casual. Like he was asking me to sign for a package. What is this? I'd asked. A prenuptial amendment. Nothing major. Just clarifying some things. For everyone's protection. Everyone. He meant them. Not me. And I signed it. I'd lowered my head and scribbled my name while Dorian watched me like I was a dog finally learning its trick. I thought compliance would buy me safety. That if I stayed small, if I played their game, I'd eventually belong. But I didn't buy safety that night. I bought shackles. The anger hit me like a blade, sharp and clean. I walked back to the desk where my notebook still lay open from the night before. Document everything, I wrote at the top of a fresh page. My hand was steady this time. Names. Dates. Words. Every one of them was a brick in the wall I was building against them. Then I opened the drawer and pulled out the USB drive. Small. Silver. Labeled in my old handwriting, in case. I'd nearly forgotten about it. A relic from before the Corwins, from when I used to trust no one. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the weight of it. It was proof that I had always known, somewhere deep down, that this day would come. If they wanted silence, they had picked the wrong woman. But before I declared war, I needed to look Alaric in the eye. One last time. It took me an hour to write the text. Too angry. Too desperate. Too sharp. Too soft. Finally, I sent 3 words, meet me. Alone. His reply came almost instantly. Where? That told me everything. He wasn't coming to apologize. He was coming to manage the story. To keep control. I chose a coffee shop in Cambridge. Neutral ground. Somewhere his voice couldn't rise without strangers noticing. When I walked in, the air was thick with roasted beans and old wood, the kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice without meaning to. I chose a table by the window, sat tall, fingers wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched. He arrived 10 minutes later. Still in a suit, but the tie loose, like he thought that made him look human. For a second, I almost forgot. Almost. Calliope, he said softly, using my name like it was an olive branch. I didn't smile. I didn't stand. He slid into the seat across from me, folding his hands like a man preparing for court. He wasn't here as my husband. He was here as Dorian's son. "Let's talk," he said. I leaned forward. My voice was steady, sharper than I felt. "Why didn't you do anything?" "He hit me, Alaric. In front of everyone. And you just stood there?" His gaze skittered away. To the table. To the window. Anywhere but me. "It was an accident. He was drunk. You know how my dad gets." The laugh that escaped me was hollow, bitter. "An accident?" "He called me a maid. That wasn't just his hand, Alaric. That was his truth. Every word he's ever thought about me, wrapped in one punch." "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he muttered. If I just what?" My voice cracked sharp enough to turn heads. "If I just smile? If I just pretend it didn't happen? If I let your father humiliate me whenever he wants?" That got his attention. His eyes locked on mine then, but I didn't see guilt. I saw fear. "You don't understand," he said, voice low. "My dad controls everything. The trust. The business. Even my career. If you push him, we both lose everything. We both lose everything." There it was. The truth laid bare. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about my dignity or my safety. It was about him. His career. His money. His father's approval. "Would you let someone hit your sister?" I asked, my voice trembling, not from weakness, but rage. "Would you stand there and do nothing? Why is it different for me?" He rubbed his temples like I was exhausting him. "Because this isn't just about you. This is about keeping the peace." "Keeping the peace?" I laughed again, sharp and joyless. "No. This is about keeping your father happy." His jaw tightened. His voice dropped into a command. "If you love me, you'll make peace with him. Apologize, and we can move forward." Apologize. For a moment, the world tilted. The walls of that cafe pressed in. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back before he could touch me. And in that second, the last cord between us snapped. Quiet. Final. I stood. My chair scraped loud against the floor. He started to say my name, but I didn't give him the chance. "If staying married to you means surrendering to him," I said, my voice clear enough that even the barista froze, "then I'll lose everything before I lose myself." And I walked out. The winter air burned my skin like fire as I stepped into the street. But I didn't shiver. For the first time, I felt steady. If Alaric wouldn't fight for me, then I would fight for myself. And I knew exactly where to find allies. By the time I trudged back to my apartment, the sky over Boston had turned that dull, leaden gray that makes everything feel tired. The place smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee and the kind of loneliness that sits in the corners. I dropped my bag, sank onto the couch, and stared at the little blinking light on my phone like it belonged to someone else. More messages. More voicemails. More thin, polite threats wrapped in corporate language. I couldn't bring myself to press play. Not yet. So I closed my eyes and let the silence try to do its work. Only it never does. Silence, in my mother's voice, was never peace, it was a slow erasure. I could see her, clear as if she were standing next to me, flower on the apron, a strand of hair escaped from her bun, that stubborn tilt to her jaw when she was about to tell me the truth. "Silence doesn't protect you, Calliope," she'd say, the words steady and soft. "It makes you invisible." I wanted, for a minute, to believe she was wrong. I wanted to pretend I could tuck my head down, swallow everything, and somehow wake up to a gentler life. But then my phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't my husband or his father. It was a message from an old friend, one of the few who had stayed in my life after I married into the Corwins. "Be careful," it read. "Dorian is prepping a defamation suit. He wants to scare you into staying quiet." The sentence hit like ice. They weren't only trying to humiliate me anymore, they were trying to erase any story that didn't match their polished version. For the first time since the mansion, something inside me shifted. Not a collapse, a shift. A wake up. I slid from the couch to the floor and folded my arms around my knees, letting the tears come because that's what bodies do when pressure finally loosens. I cried for the punch, yes. For the sting of betrayal. But I also cried for every dinner where my voice was smothered by practiced laughter, for every time I'd told myself endurance was dignity. I don't know how long I stayed huddled there. When I finally pushed myself up, the apartment was darker, the city quieter, and the ache somehow heavier in my limbs, like I'd been carrying someone else's name on my shoulders. At my desk I opened my laptop with hands that felt both clumsy and precise. I typed the kind of words you hope you never have to: legal aid, domestic violence resources, pro bono counsel. Then, like a small beacon, I found a community legal clinic in the heart of the city, evening hours, walk-ins welcome. My breath hitched. I'd been in yesterday's clothes all day, makeup smudged, hair a tangle. I could have sat there and let fear be my blanket. But what would that change? I threw on a coat and left. The clinic sat between a laundromat and a discount shoe store, unremarkable and honest. Paper and carpet and the smell of coffee that meant people were working, not performing. An old sign flapped slightly outside the door. Inside, a woman called my name before I'd even reached the desk. She was sharp-eyed and small in the way that meant she fit easily into the world without letting the world fit into her. "Can I help you?" she asked, not like the question was a favor but like it was her job to set things right. I need advice," I managed. She pointed to a chair and I sat, all the words spilling out of me in a rush: the party, the punch, the voicemail, the threats, Alaric's silence. I told the parts one could hold together, and when stumbling into tears, she didn't flinch or look away. She just listened. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, in a voice that wasn't soft but wasn't cruel either, "You're not crazy. You're in a system designed to break you. I've seen men like Dorian fall before." Those words, simple as they were, felt like light through a crack. Her name was Marjorie. Retired attorney. Volunteer. She handed me a business card the way someone passes a lifeline, not flashy, just firm and practical. Evening hours. Walk-ins. We'll do what we can, she said. I left the clinic clutching her card like a talisman. For the first time in days I felt something other than panic. A plan didn't exist yet, but the idea of one did. Marjorie's sentence looped in my head, I've seen men like Dorian fall before. If that was possible, then Dorian Corwin could be next. But how do you topple a man whose whole world is built to make you small? Where do you even begin when the opposition has money, lawyers, influence, and a polished public face? I slid the card into my pocket and looked up at the city lights. The winter cold pricked my cheeks and made my breath visible. My hands were steady now. Some part of me hummed awake with a dangerous, strangely calm determination. I had evidence on paper, a notebook full of insults and dates, a napkin that still bore the stain as proof, and a retired lawyer's promise of help. That was more than nothing. So I started to make a list, names, times, places, and for every item I wrote, the knot in my chest loosened a little. But lists are only the beginning. Allies are only the start. And the moment I realized how far Dorian's reach stretched, I understood this would not be a quick fight. I turned the page and began to write the first of many steps. Then my phone buzzed again. I read the sender and froze. The next morning didn't feel lighter, no, not at all. The heaviness was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't the crushing kind that pinned me to the floor. It was the kind you choose to carry when you've decided to fight back. For the first time in days, I made myself a real breakfast. Not stale crackers, not cold coffee reheated in the microwave. 2 scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh coffee. It wasn't much, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One shaky step, but a step nonetheless. By mid-morning, I was back at the legal clinic. Marjorie was already there, hunched over a stack of papers, glasses perched on her nose like she'd never retired at all. When she looked up, her eyes softened just a fraction. "You came back," she said, almost like she'd been waiting. "I can't do this alone," I admitted, sliding into the chair. "No one can," she replied simply. "Let's talk options." For the next hour, we went through everything, filing for a restraining order, documenting each and every insult and injury, even the moments I'd tried to convince myself weren't bad enough to matter. Marjorie kept repeating, "Patterns matter more than single events. You've been in a system of control, Colopy. The more we prove it, the harder it is for him to twist it." Then she leaned back, folded her arms, and dropped something I never saw coming. "You should know, this isn't my first time dealing with Dorian Corwin." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Years ago, I represented one of his employees. A man who stood up to him after being harassed at work. Dorian blacklisted him, ruined his career. We lost the case because Dorian buried us in legal maneuvering." She smirked faintly and tapped her desk. "But I still have the records. Letters. Evidence. Proof of how far he'll go when he thinks someone's a threat." My pulse quickened. "You kept it?" She nodded firmly. "I don't throw away things that might matter later. And trust me, Dorian Corwin always leaves a trail." For the first time, it felt like we weren't just playing defense. After leaving the clinic, I headed to the library. Sitting among the smell of paper and the hum of computers felt grounding, like being back in a world that didn't revolve around the Corwins. I dug into public records, property filings, charity reports, tax documents. Hours passed in silence until, there it was. A transfer of a luxury condo in Beacon Hill into a trust with no named beneficiary. Just days before the party. A clear attempt to hide assets. I snapped photos of everything. As I packed up, my phone buzzed. A message from Alaric: "Stop this madness before you ruin us all." A week ago, that would have gutted me. Today, I laughed. Short, sharp, humorless. That night, Marjorie and I spread everything across her desk, her old files, my photos, a growing map of dates and names. She pushed her glasses down, looking me square in the eye. "When you fight someone like Dorian," she said, "you don't aim to win the first round. You aim to end the war." Her words stayed with me long after I left. For the first time, I wasn't falling, I was standing. Planting my feet. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was building a weapon. But I didn't realize Dorian had already set his trap. The pounding on my door came before sunrise. At first, I thought it was a neighbor. But when I opened it, a man in a heavy overcoat stood there with an envelope in hand. "Are you Colop Corwin?" His voice was clipped, practiced. "Yes. You've been served." He shoved the papers into my hands and left before I could even speak. I stood barefoot in the doorway, the cold air creeping around me as I opened the envelope. Defamation. Restraining order. Page after page of legal jargon designed to gut me. Words that painted me as unstable, vindictive, dangerous. They'd scrubbed me out of the family like I was a stain on their reputation. My fingers shook as I called Alaric. He picked up on the second ring. "You brought this on yourself," he said flatly. "He warned you. I told you to let it go. Alaric, your father hit me. In front of everyone. Now he's dragging me to court and you're, what? Fine with it?" There was a pause, then his voice again, cold as stone. "I can't get between you and my father. You made your choices. Live with them." And then he hung up. I stared at the phone like it had betrayed me too. The papers blurred as I tried to reread them. This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was character assassination. Every whispered insult at those dinner tables weaponized into evidence, emotional instability, vindictive behavior. I drove straight to Marjorie. She didn't need me to explain. One look at my face and the papers in my hands was enough. She skimmed them, her mouth a hard line. "Let me guess," she said. "They're making you out to be the problem. Dangerous. Unstable." I nodded, choking on the words. They bribed someone, didn't they?" Marjorie pulled a folder from her desk and sighed. Yes. A former housekeeper. They paid her to testify that you've had violent outbursts, that you threatened Dorian before. The room tilted. I had to grip the chair to keep steady. They're building a case to bury you, Marjorie said softly. It's ugly. But listen to me, people like him don't do this unless they're scared. He's feeling threatened. That means you're getting through. A bitter laugh escaped me. So he hits me, destroys my name, and still plays the victim? Marjorie leaned forward, her eyes fierce. Exactly. That's his plan. But now we show him he picked the wrong woman. Her words should have comforted me. Instead, they hollowed me out. For one wild second, I wanted to run. Pack a bag, disappear, let Boston and its ghosts fade behind me. But then I caught my reflection in her office window. Tired. Bruised. But still here. Still me. If they're this desperate to bury me, I whispered, then they know I can hurt them. Marjorie nodded. Exactly. And now we burn the ground they stand on. A week before Christmas, we sat in her office surrounded by towers of files and half-drunk mugs of tea. I handed her everything I'd gathered, bank records, property transfers, leaked correspondence. She flipped through it all, tapping one particular document. This, she said, a smile ghosting her lips, will set him on fire. Are you ready for that? Because once we do this, there's no going back. There's nothing left to go back to, I said. Then let's scorch the earth. And so we planned. No outbursts, no reckless moves. Just precision. Dorian lived for his reputation, for the illusion of power. If we stripped that away, no amount of money could save him. I spent 2 sleepless nights drafting anonymous emails to investigative journalists. Each included files, proof of his hidden assets, his property transfers, whispers of fraud. I scheduled them for release at exactly 8 a.m. on Christmas Eve, the same morning as his annual charity gala. He wanted cameras to capture him as Boston's benevolent tycoon. Instead, they would capture his empire cracking in real time. That night, I slipped into the gala in a simple black dress. Not to dazzle. To reclaim my place. The chandeliers sparkled, glasses clinked, wealth perfumed the air. No one stopped me. Pretending was the Corwin's specialty. Alaric found me first, his face pale. He grabbed my arm. What are you doing here? I pulled away calmly. Watch. Dorian took the podium, his voice booming about generosity, charity, legacy. At 8:03, his phone lit up. Then another. Then another. Around the room, screens buzzed as headlines exploded. Real estate mogul Dorian Corwin under federal investigation for fraud and money laundering. Whispers spread like fire. Cameras flashed. Dorian's face reddened as he fumbled his speech. This is slander, an attack on my family's name. And that's when the agents walked in. Federal agents, papers in hand, calm and deliberate. They served him a subpoena beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, in front of Boston's elite. Phones recorded as his composure cracked. I didn't stay for the full collapse. I didn't need to. I walked out as Alaric called my name, but I didn't look back. For once, I wasn't invisible. My new apartment overlooked the harbor. Small, quiet, filled with boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. I sat at the window that morning, watching the ferries crawl across the water, seagulls swooping like they owned the sky. My phone buzzed with updates, but I didn't rush to answer. Their storms weren't mine anymore. When I met Marjorie later, she handed me a report. Fraud charges. Property seizures. Investigations piling up. The restraining order dismissed this morning. He's finished, Colopy. Finished. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. Marjorie's gaze softened. It's okay to grieve, even when you win. She was right. I'd burned down the house I'd lived in for years. Even if it was a prison, it was still part of me. 2 days later, Alaric asked to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. In a quiet cafe, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. I'm sorry, he said, voice low. I was scared. Scared of losing everything. I see now how wrong I was. Can we rebuild? I wanted to believe him. Part of me always would. But then I remembered his voice at the party, telling me to apologize to the man who hit me. I pulled my hand back. I'm done rebuilding things that were never safe for me. His face crumpled, but I left without comforting him. That night, I stood by the harbor, the wind sharp against my skin. For the first time in years, I felt unchained. Back in my apartment, I texted Marjorie, thank you for helping me burn it all down. Now I can finally build something new. I curled up by the window, breathing in the salt air. The ashes of their empire weren't my burden anymore. They were my freedom.